Good morning. Welcome to the Levin Morning Briefing. The Levin Morning Briefings are a way for our students and the general public to learn about the importance of public service from leaders in the public, private, and nonprofit sector. Today we're very fortunate. We're joined by Council President Blaine Griffin, who represents Cleveland's Ward 6. Now, Ward 6 is one of the most diverse wards in the city. It includes Fairfax, Larchmere, Little Italy, Woodland Hills, and parts of Buckeye-Shaker. Also, University Circle, North Broadway, Slavic Village, and Union Miles. Boy, the council president must have roller skates. He's originally from Youngstown and moved to Cleveland in 1993 and resides in the Larchmere neighborhood. He's a graduate of Malone College in Canton, Ohio, with a bachelor's degree in communications. He is also a graduate of Cleveland State University's Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs Leadership Academy. We're proud to call him one of our own. Council President, welcome.
How you doing, Dean? Great to be here today.
How did you get into public service, and how did you end up in elected office?
Well, it's an interesting journey. It always starts at home. Yes. I was raised by a single-parent mom, and my mother was always civically engaged. She used to volunteer coaching the cheerleaders on my Little League football team, and she just had a spirit of social worker, and she became actually a master's degree social worker from that other school a little bit further up the street. It started with her. I had a very active father who actually played in the NFL, but he was a businessman and he owned a bar. Wow. And he also did security, some high-end security. They taught me early on to be civically engaged and to be involved. And then as I got older, my first job was at the Harvard Community Service Center, and my job was to mentor young people who were caught up in the criminal justice system. And I would see how these young people would experience injustice. And I started getting involved with judges, and once these judges seen the passion that I had for the community, these judges in turn asked me to help them, of course, get in office and run campaigns. Little by little, I met some phenomenal people like Arnold Pinckney and Stephanie Tubbs Jones, and then eventually my mentor, my friend, one of my best friends, Frank Jackson. I ran a couple of times myself. Early on, when I was in my 20s, I was unsuccessful, but due to meeting people like Stephanie and Arnold and some of those folks, I was able to continue to stay in and continue to contribute civically.
It takes a significant amount of intestinal fortitude to put yourself out there for elective office. When you first decided to make a run, what are some of the things that went into that decision? Did you ask yourself, well, can I do this? Or how did you make the decision to put yourself out there?
I've always wanted to do something transformational. I think everybody should have a calling, and I think, I heard a speech one time by Jeffrey Canada about how you develop courage, and you got to have something in you that drives you, something that stirs you up every day. And the injustice that we see for our communities, just called me to be an advocate. I tell people, I also, am a person who grew up in the church, but, I thought it wouldn't be a good idea for me to be in church because I thought I cussed too much. So I decided to just, do something different, something where I could be myself, be unique, but also make my mark, but at the same time help people. And it's just something innate in me to really want to make sure that we address injustices in our community. You do have to have courage. This job is not for the faint of heart. It is not what everybody thinks that it is. There's more days, more difficult days than there are good days because people are dealing with some serious issues. So you have to get in it for the right reason. And if you get in it for the right reason, you can weather the storm and you can actually be a productive person.
Indeed. How did you focus in on City Council as a place to apply your passion? And tell me about after you answer that, tell me about the institutional role of the City Council.
Well, I chose council. I told you I ran once when I was a younger person in 2001. My wife and I had a young family at the time, and I just really was involved in my community and these young guys that I was mentoring. Some wound up going to the NFL and the NBA, and then others wound up going to getting good jobs and being truck drivers and mechanics and other things, and then others get caught up in the legal system. So I felt like I always needed to stand in the gap for those folks, and the best place to stand in the gap for those folks was at the local level in council. Council is the windshield to democracy for everybody. There's one of my favorite murals in the city of Cleveland, and I hope everybody takes a ride by and sees it. It's on the side of the Cleveland Public Library at the Harvey Rice branch, and it's by a guy named Black. I think it's I forget, Bill Black. And it basically has a microphone where he points it out to the community, and it says, "Speak to me, speak for me." And I get inspired by that because, that's what we do every day. We speak for people who won't get a chance to talk to their governor, may not see their mayor, may not interact with a president of the United States. But you know what? They know Griff. That's what my friends call me. They know Blaine. They know me. Being involved in the PTA, being involved in the schools. I've always been involved in the local level. I believe that strong leadership needs to be street club, block by block. And that's why I think council people are so important to the process and the fabric of our democracy. Council person's role. There is no job description. Every day is a different challenge. Every day is a different struggle. Every day you learn something, which is what's so exciting about the job. However, if you want to boil it down to 3 basic points, our job is to set the budget, which we just passed this Monday, for the administration. Our job is to provide oversight. We have an oversight responsibility to make sure that the departments are delivering quality service. And then we have a responsibility to drive policy. And that's the part that a lot of people don't pay attention to. And I'm glad that we have an opportunity to speak to your esteemed students, because we want to make sure that we frame policy, that we have policies. One of the policies that we did that we're proud of as City Council is we put a lead safe ordinance in place. And because we put that cornerstone in place, we've been able to raise about $115 million in public, private, and philanthropic dollars to help homeowners that have children, families that have children that are renting homes, to remediate lead in their homes so that they can live in lead-safe environments, create a stable atmosphere. That's policy. That's how we do those kind of things. Living wages and those kind of things. These are the kind of things that council people can do to really affect the quality of life. But fast forward, council people are also asked to be ombudsmen. They're also asked to fix innumerable amount of problems. Council people are often, I tell people, one of my favorite folks is Ayana Van Zant, and a lot of people expect for council to fix their life. And that's what we do. But when we take on this challenge, you can't complain, because this is what we ask for.
Indeed. I like that phrase, the windshield of democracy.
Yeah.
Tell me about the skills that make you effective and your colleagues effective.
You first have to be a good leader. And being a good leader means being a good follower. You have to listen to people. You have to make sure that you're in tune with what's going on in the neighborhoods on a day-to-day basis. You have to make sure that you have a good translation skills. And when I tell you translation, I'm not talking about English and Spanish and different languages. You have to be able to translate between the streets and the boardrooms, the classrooms and the corners. You got to be able to translate, because your job is to make sure that you help those worlds collide in a positive way, so that the streets or the corners or those places or the classrooms aren't taken advantage of by these powerful systems, because people have pretty much walked away from systems. They don't believe systems work for them. So you have to bend the arc of justice as a council person, and you have to have a keen understanding of where you insert yourself and how you actually can get things done for people, which means that you have to be a very good translator, and you have to be able to read people. You have to be able to, go into different rooms. I would tell people that I start out some days in the coffee shop, and I end up some days in the local watering hole, and in between, I'm probably in boardrooms, and I'm here with Dean Anglin or wherever else. You have to be you have to be able to be somewhat of a chameleon in a positive way.
Indeed. I'm curious, given the fact that there's so much apathy and non-trust in government and institutions today, how do you work with that and try and manage that in your own life and career? How do you convince people that they should be part of the system and it can work for them?
It's difficult, and I once heard, I once walked through the Fairfax community with Dr. Tommy Mihaljevic, the president and CEO of the Cleveland Clinic, when I wanted him to get an up-close view and personal feel for what was going on in Fairfax. And he said something as we were walking, and we were talking about the distrust that the community had with the clinic, that we were trying to change that narrative. And he said something that I'll never forget. He said that trust is gained in drops but lost in buckets.
Wow.
And you have to gain trust little by little. You have to be a person of your word. I often tell people I never make a promise that I don't intend on delivering on. I don't make promises that I don't plan on carrying out. So you have to be honest with people. You have to make sure that people have a sense of that you're not lying to them. Mm-hmm. You have to have a sense of people feeling that you're fighting for them. You have to have a sense that people feel like even if they disagree with you, they feel like you're authentic, which I think authenticity is probably one of the biggest skills and one of the most one of the best traits that you can have, not just in politics, but in business, in academia, in any field that you're in. If you're authentic and you bring an authentic approach to it, and even if people disagree with you, or even if people are angry with you or upset with you, they'll respect you.
Wow. Tell me about the changing role of politics and how that's impacted the city council at the local level. Has the role and function of City Hall and city council changed over time?
Well, our society has changed.
Yeah.
We're dealing with a high, high illiteracy rate in the city of Cleveland, and let me answer that in a couple of ways, and I'm going to try to be as fast as possible because I want to answer that from two angles.
Yes.
One is from a national perspective. We become so polarized as a society, extreme conservatism and extreme liberal. But city politics runs on practicality. I often tell people that Republicans and Democrats, conservative or liberals, all dislike potholes, all dislike abandonment, all dislike high grass. They all want the police to show up when they call.
Yeah.
Don't let people fool you that poor black and people of color don't want good policing. We want good policing. We just want it to be constitutionally correct, and we want it to be respectful and professional.
Wow.
It's a great book, by the way, for your students to read called The Collapse of the Criminal Justice System by William Stentz, and it really talks about that in a very personal way. The other thing that I would tell you is that we're also dealing with a time where we actually as a community are going through a massive change in technology. We're going through a massive change in who the system is built for. I often tell people that people respond to the rich, they cater to the middle class or tolerate the middle class, and they totally disregard the poor. Well, how can you serve who you disdain? And if you disregard or disdain poor people, and we have a city of an overwhelmingly two Clevelands where we have a large portion of poor people, then how can you serve correctly? So the systems in our schools and our government have been built to serve the rich and the middle class, but not always the poor. And the poor is growing tremendously in the city of Cleveland.
I want to get to that in a minute, but I'm going to ask you about technology. You mentioned technology. Has technology influenced how you interact with your constituents and the wider public?
Absolutely, but I'm old school, and I was taught that even though we can be high tech, we also have to be high touch. Okay. So I want people to touch, feel, and see me. I don't live in a virtual reality. But the challenge that we have in politics these days is that everybody has an opinion on Twitter, and everybody has an opinion on Facebook and Instagram and some of these other platforms, and it oftentimes just gets to be a distraction. And, I tell people that a large portion of the community that I serve are not engaged in that world. But you have to be able to do both, because the emerging millennials and some of the younger people who are helping to grow our city and bring great innovative ideas, you have to be engaged in that world. I had to learn the hard way. not to argue with people on Twitter, because Twitter arguments often end up in, at least me, I don't know about others, saying or doing something that we regret. So I'd rather, sometimes when I'm on there, I don't engage and get into major debates. I often tell people, you want to see me, come to my office. I'd love to have a conversation with you, because people generally act in a different way when they're not behind a phone or a computer and having the courage to basically challenge everything in the world. But when they have to deal with you face to face, they often have a different tone and tenor.
Indeed. I wonder, during the pandemic, did you have to deal with the misinformation that was brought by social media about vaccines and the like?
Absolutely. It was a tremendous disservice to our community. Like I said, technology has been a blessing, but it also can be a curse. Everybody say, well, it must be true because I heard it on the internet. And I got all these conspiracy theories, and here it is, we're out here advocating for people to get the shot and do their part and get the shot because we wanted to save lives. I mean, I watched people that actually died of COVID. I mean, even to this day, as late as 3 weeks ago, I had a good friend in my hometown, Andre Richardson, who died of COVID. So really trying to encourage our community to protect themselves became a challenge because of all of these conspiracy theories that started floating around on the internet. Now, I'm a believer in science, and I believe that everything should have a rigorous oversight whenever you're doing vaccines and everything else. But it was tested, and it was proven to be effective. And, trying to educate people when you're up against the winds of misinformation is always difficult.
I can imagine, Council President. Well, we talked about this before we came on. I'm a not so recent transplant from the East Coast. Been here 5 years now, and came here when Cleveland was on the rise. It was moving forward. Has the pandemic stalled that or stopped that movement?
I wouldn't say that it stopped it or stalled it. I would say it paused it.
Okay.
And due to us being probably receiving the 8th largest amount of ARPA dollars, American Rescue Plan dollars, American Rescue Plan Act dollars, we've helped stabilize a lot of that. However, I will tell you that Cleveland is a resilient city. And that's what we don't give ourselves enough credit for. It's a city full of tough people, a city of survivors. We often forget our blue collar beer and a shot background that most of these guys that worked hard in the factory that built this city, and that now their children are running this city. Often forget how resilient we are. So I think we proved a lot to ourselves. And I think that the growth is still taking place. But I will tell you that Cleveland is and continues to be and has been a Dickensian model of a city. As in the Charles Dickens Tale of Two Cities, where you have affluent areas that are thriving and doing well, but then you have other areas that are struggling and have abject poverty or dealing with violence, low education, no attainment, and the worst thing of all, which is the soft bigotry of low expectations, which people sometimes in certain neighborhoods don't believe that they have a trajectory that they're going to have a great quality of life and a great outcome. And those are the kind of things that we have to battle every day. How do we stabilize these affluent communities? I tell people all the time, I do not hate rich people. I love rich people. I want them to come to Ward 6. I want them to come to Cleveland. But we also got to make sure we take care of the poor, the disenfranchised, the downtrodden, the least of these.
Well, then, extrapolate on that. What are the post-pandemic priorities for Cleveland?
I would tell you that a couple of things that COVID really exacerbated.
Yes.
Housing stability. I used to always believe, and I'm still a strong believer in education, not in the ways of A's, B's, and C's and all of those different things. I often tell people, I joke, Dean, I said some people graduated summa cum laude. I graduated, thank God Almighty. So I never hate on education, but what I tell people is this, is that I used to think it was education, I used to think it was safety, but it's housing stability. And, the pandemic really showed that if you live in a house that has poor conditions, environmental conditions, mold and mildew and dust and you know, lead exposure, and you have unhealthy environment, domestic violence, rose through the pandemic. Really, just having strong housing structures and having wraparound support for housing stability was really exacerbated through the pandemic. We had to do so much in rental assistance and so much in utility assistance and so much in just trying to help people survive day to day and live in a stable home, which was critical. The other thing that it exacerbated was the digital divide. When people moved to telehealth, when we moved to digital, the future of work and digitalization, you had so many, even if you just have a grandmother who can't go to church but relies on that worship 4 or 5 times a week and then have an ability to do it. Or if you have an elderly person who stays at home and their kids stay out of state or don't stay around, how can their kids look after them? And that digital divide was there where so many people just didn't have access. Food insecurity was another thing. Right now, the last time I looked, inflation has food prices at approximately 9.5% higher. So we had to do a lot to provide food for people. As I told you earlier, there is no job description for a council person. You just roll up your sleeves and you get in. You get in where you fit in to help people in your ward and in your city.
Indeed. Before we get out of this segment, I want to return to housing for a minute. We now hear that there are investors coming in and buying properties in bulk. How does that threaten the housing stock as you know it? Is that something we ought to worry about, or is that just the natural market processes?
It's a tremendous threat, and it is abusive, and it is one of the most criminal things that people are doing. These investors come in, they basically devalue the homes because they suck all the equity out of them. They put little back into them. They have substandard housing. A lot of times they're out of state, and even in some cases out of the country. I think they are predators, and I think that we need to have laws to treat them just as the predators that they are. It is probably one of the most existential threats to our community are these LLCs that are coming into our cities, buying up these properties, doing little to nothing to stabilize them, and devastating our community. This has happened before. We've shined a light on it before, but as any person knows, a slick person only gets slicker. Unless they totally get reformed, they just find a slicker way to do stuff. And they just found a way, and they found a new loophole and a new way to do it. And we're actually looking at things, and I actually had a discussion yesterday with the administration, with the mayor's administration, about what tools we can actually start lining up and putting in place in order to fight back against these LLCs. It's one of the biggest threats to the stabilization of our community that's out there right now.
With the land trust and organization like the Cleveland Neighborhood Partners,
Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, Cuyahoga County Land Bank. We have a lot of different people that have some different tools that can be helpful. And I encourage people that if you do have a home, and let me just put this on a different lens, the biggest, quickest, fastest, most proven way to wealth creation is home ownership. And making sure that we put people in homes and actually will stabilize neighborhoods. Because if you look at a person like me, who I call myself a PK, a project kid, I lived in 5 different places by the time I was in the 8th grade. The average kid in the city of Cleveland does that. We have to find a way in order to help, especially single black women who are catching a lot of heck in this city, get stabilization by having homes that they can own at a reasonable rate, affordable housing in neighborhoods that are safe, and being able to get them in high-performing schools. That's the recipe to turn our city around.
Indeed. We hear a lot of challenging things about urban areas and cities, but what are some of the good things that you notice when you walk around, drive around town? What are the good things that are happening in Cleveland?
The good thing that are happening in Cleveland, and I know that this sounds very, very, I'm going to get to a technical side, but number one is the people. The people of the city of Cleveland are brilliant. It's a resilient group of people who are humble. We're not East Coast, we're not West Coast, we're not down South. We got that charm, we have that grit. And just to be able to interact with the people of Cleveland, I just have so much confidence in the people of Cleveland. But if I really wanted to get into our best and brightest opportunity that's happening in Cleveland that nobody talks about, is our water.
Oh.
Our water, we represent with the Great Lakes 1/5 of the world's fresh water supply. Not only should we make sure that we protect it, but we need to always make sure that we, utilize it for as an economic development tool. That we continue to improve upon it. Our water source and what we're doing around water technology is probably, other than maybe Milwaukee and a couple of other cities, probably the most unique thing that's happening in Cleveland that nobody talks about. Another thing that's happening in Cleveland that a lot of people don't talk about are the patents that are created in Cleveland. If you look at how many patents are created in Cleveland, and a good indicator of your economy is how many patents are created coming out of the Cleveland Clinic, university hospitals, our universities. If you look at Cleveland Institute of Art, which is another institution that a lot of people overlook, you have so many patents coming out of Cleveland. I have a business called Nottingham Spurk, and all they do is build different stuff. They build everything from the Swiffer wet jet to ice cream machines. And just the amount of ingenuity that comes out of Cleveland that a lot of people don't talk about floors me, that we don't talk about that. Now the problem, in addition to that, is we need to take those traded sector jobs that are created from these patents and stop sending these patents overseas, which is another thing that got exacerbated through the COVID-19 pandemic. Is why do we have to keep on going to China and Korea for masks?
Yeah.
Why can't we make them over on Huff? Or why can't we make latex gloves or whatever right over here in Central? So all of these patents that we're created, we have to marry them and stop offshoring our jobs and start trying to make those factories here. Ohio is number 3 in manufacturing, only behind California and Texas. And Cleveland, and I have to check with my good friends at Siri, the manufacturing company, has one of the best infrastructures for manufacturing. And all you need to do is get certified after about a maybe 12 to 18 month period, where we can actually put people in good, high paying jobs in the city of Cleveland so that we can market and put Cleveland on the map with all of these inventions we're making with heart valves and everything else, and turn them into an industry. And our healthcare industry is amazing. We don't nearly tout that as much as we should. Sometimes we need to double down on some of the successful industries that we have too.
Wow, I'm learning quite a bit from you this morning.
Well, I'm a student dean, and that's why I enjoy these kind of sessions, because every day I'm learning.
Very good. Well, let's move to our questions. I'm going to ask my colleague Kara Copeland to help me ask some questions here. Our first question: what can we do to nurture and develop future leaders in our region? Share some examples of what is working and what gaps we need to focus on.
Number one is exposure. It's always funny when I hear these stories because, I never forget, sometimes when I was in college and when I was in school, I had to learn book stuff, and I was not the best student. And I had to probably study 8 hours when I would watch one of these guys study for 1 hour or 2 hours and then have a beer and be like, when are you coming to hang out with us, Griff? And I'm like, I still got to study for another 6 hours or so, right? What I learned through that, Dean, is that a lot of them had exposure. They worked in an uncle's business. They worked in their father's business. They worked in their family's business. They were exposed to stock markets and trading, and they were exposed to macroeconomics. They were exposed to legal things. And here it is, I'm starting from a blank canvas, and a lot of these folks already have exposure. I think we really have to do a better job of trying to expose young people and put them in settings where they actually can shadow a Dean Roland England and see, maybe I could become a professor one day. Shadow a Blaine Griffin. Maybe I could be a council person one day. Shadow different business people. I think we don't do enough to mentor young people and put them in a position. And really, really, I know a lot of people don't like to hear this. Pastors of churches don't like to hear this. Business moguls don't like to hear this. And politicians doggone sure don't like to hear this. But we need to have a succession plan. I never forget hearing Colin Powell talked about when he used to go to war, that his biggest strategy wasn't how he would enter into the war, it was how he was trying to exit, how his exit strategy was.
Yeah.
We don't do enough as professions, as council people, business people, other leaders, of figuring out our exit strategy of how we get to the next level so that we could pull up the person behind us. That's called Sankofa in the African culture, where you look forward but you reach behind. And that's what we have to do a better job of. And I think people sometimes get too caught up into the American folktale about pulling people up by their bootstraps and not really recognizing that people need help and they need exposure.
I'm just curious, just to add on to that question, that we've seen a series of leadership changes in the region. Is that a good, positive thing, and how can we encourage more of that?
It's a great thing. I will caution that there is some institutional knowledge that is being lost. I'm the council president. I love being the council president, but I'm fifth in seniority on council, which means that there are 12 other members after me that have less time than me, and I only have 5 years. So as much as I've been in government and I worked in the administration, I've been involved in politics, been a vice chair of the Democratic Party, Cuyahoga County Democratic Party, this is still a learning curve for me. I got a rude awakening in the budget process that, wow, you gotta really be on top of your game. And what I will tell you is that, that we as a body and we as council and everybody else, we love new leadership, but I see myself now as a bridge between the young, innovative, strong, idealistic people that are coming along and a lot of the institutional wisdom and knowledge that I've had the privilege of learning from, and how can I connect those folks. So I look at myself as a connector. So I don't want to just throw all of us old folks away. I don't want to just throw all of the institutional knowledge away. I want to make sure how we complement each other in order to make a better city.
That's a hard thing to do. Karen, do we have another question? Thank you. Says, talk about your work to address diversity, equity, and inclusion in Cleveland. How will the work of the City Council look different with this lens? And how would it play a foundation in Cleveland's future?
That's a great question. One of the first things that I did when I became council president is the council president, most council presidents, or a lot of council presidents, become the chair of the finance committee. The reason that most council presidents become chair of the finance committee is because all legislation, big or small, whether you talk about a stadium deal like Progressive Field or the Guardians deal, or the Brown Stadium, or if you're talking about just a regular street improvement in the neighborhood, all have to come through the Finance Committee for final approval before it goes to the full floor for a vote. One of the first things that I did is I added diversity, equity, and inclusion to the finance lens. So anybody that comes before our committee has to give us either a community benefit, or they have to show us how diversity, equity, and inclusion is going to be addressed by the portion of the city dollars that we're putting in. So we're being more assertive and making sure that we're intentional to tell people up front, don't come to us after the fact. If you want this thing passed and to go to the next level, we're sending a clear message. Bring us a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan up front. That's number one. But let me say this. People are tired of urban anthropology, and they're tired of academic exercises. People want to touch, feel, and see change. We know that black women, single heads of households, make up a large majority of the city until we actually show clearly how they are living and having a better quality of life, because that's the denominator that we really need to start talking about, then that's when we'll know that we're moving the needle. Not just looking and saying we move something 2 percentage points or 3 percentage points. People want to touch, feel, and see change. They don't want, they're tired of all of the different rhetoric. People want to understand and see it. And that's what I think is more important, because perception trumps reality a lot of times. And that's what we have to get to.
Kara? Says council on Monday evening approved the city budget. From a revenue perspective, what do you see as the challenges facing the city in 2022 and beyond?
Well, I had some serious reservations and some grave concerns passing this budget, because we're using approximately $60 million of one-time money, between $56 to $60 million of one-time money. We have to change revenue. We have to find a way to have more revenue sources. Our revenue does not match our expenses. We're going to have to be more frugal in how we hire. And unfortunately, the largest part of our budget is the public safety part. So nobody ever wants to hear that we might have to hire less police officers or hire less firefighters or less EMS first responders. But we got to be frugal. And one of the things we're going to do is really look every quarter at council at where we are. And if after the second quarter, if somebody is at 70% of what they were allocated to spend, then we're going to have to tighten up the reins or work with the administration in order to try to encourage them to make cuts or really hold back on legislation that will allow them to move forward. I will also tell you that there's a lot of uncertainty, inflation, because of this absurd war that we're experiencing with Russia in invading Ukraine. Is causing inflation, so gas prices and everything else is going up. And then you also have some other unknowns, like we have a police House Bill 512, where we may have to pay extra money because the state is kicking back, which sometimes the state is not our friend, kicking back the responsibility of paying approximately 15 to 20 million in a local match for police and fire pensions. So there's a lot of uncertainties that we have to look at, and at the end of the day, like any responsible person, we're going to have to make cuts, or we're going to have to bring in more revenue in order to keep pace. We cannot continue to sustain a city budget with one-time money, even if it is ARPA money, because that is just not a sustainable way to run the government.
In general, Council President, what percentage of the budget constitute unfunded mandates?
I don't have that number, Dean.
That's okay.
I don't have that number. I think that's a great question, but I will tell you that we're in negotiations right now.
Right.
So until those negotiations with those north of 30 unions are settled, that's an unfunded mandate that we might have to look at as well, because depending on how those go. And once again, council does not handle that. That's an administrative function. They're going to be the ones that will work with the attorneys to handle that. But that's the point of what we're talking about, that there's several things that can possibly go unfunded, or we don't want to experience what we experienced in approximately 2003, 2004, where we hire a bunch of people and then the next year we have to lay people off. It was a horrible feeling to watch police officers who had just gotten out of the academy, got sworn in, and literally got laid off and had to wait to get ramped up in. And those are the kind of things that we want to avoid. And why we really challenged and asked the administration to make sure that they come back to us with a more comprehensive plan on how we're going to do city services. We have to change the way we do business to be successful in the city of Cleveland.
I understand. Kara? It says here, not a question, but a comment. We're so fortunate to have political leaders with the knowledge, honesty, intelligence, passion, and authenticity as Blaine Griffin. Boy, you got a fan here.
That's what I was going to say. Thank you, whoever that is. I appreciate you, and the check is in the mail.
But let me go back to an earlier question about the budget. Talk about this feeling that City Hall is not efficient or effective and it needs to be modernized. Is that really a challenge?
There's a lot of things that City Hall can improve. Modernization is one. We do have to drag people into making sure that how can you do online permitting? How can you make sure that you have better ways of expediting, the process? One-stop shopping. Making sure that if people go to the local library, can they get a birth certificate at the library? There's things that we should be able to do at City Hall to make it more efficient and public-facing.
Okay.
I would tell you that The strongest effort that I've seen is when former Mayor Jackson, at the time I worked in his administration, convened public, private, and city hall partners and created what was called the Operations Efficiency Task Force, where we scanned and looked at every city department and basically looked at how we could do more with less and streamline operations. So those are things that we can do and that we need to do an assessment on how we could be more efficient. But let me say this, city workers get a bad rap. Yeah. City workers are some of the most hardest working public service that you could ever imagine. Most of these folks don't get paid as much as they do in the private sector. It's very cruel when your peers that you're friends with are at the golf course at 2:30 in the afternoon, and you have to work until 7 or 8 o'clock at night because you're a dedicated public servant trying to make sure that you just keep the trains running and make a city run, where that person in the private sector is making more money, not working as hard, and you dedicated your life to public service. That's why it's a calling. It's a ministry. It's something that you have to do. So I'm not for throwing out all of the processes, because one of the things that I have learned is that it took us a while to get to some of these processes, but I'm also not into the business as usual. So once again, I see myself right in the middle of trying to shape how we salvage some of the things that have worked in the past, because there are some things that are just basic blocking and tackling that we just need to do well in order to win the game. But then there's innovative and creative things like that we could do in order to try to have one-stop shopping or better technology and streamline services and have more efficient ways to do business. But I will tell you, all in all, Cleveland is a dedicated group of workers, and what people don't realize, and I want to give a shout out to all those workers, that during COVID, your trash still got picked up, your streets still got shoveled, police still showed up, EMS showed up, even though we had, got hammered with people that were affected with COVID. There were times when we had as many as 200 police officers out with COVID, but people were still out there doing their job. That's why I tell you that I have so much confidence in the resilience of the people of Cleveland, because most of those people that work in Cleveland also live in Cleveland and love this city.
Wise word. More questions for the council president. Here we have, Ohio City seems to have little political power in Columbus. As Cleveland's council president, are there specific problems that need to be solved by working together with city council leaders in other cities to win legislative changes in Columbus? LLC registration policy, how can cities be more effective?
That's a great question, and I actually am fortunate to have an answer for it, because last week I had the privilege and honor of spending a few days in Washington, D.C. with my peers from all over the country. And one of the things, council presidents and council people and mayors and others from all over the United States descended upon Washington, D.C. every March, and then in the November they go to a different host city. This year it'll be Kansas City, I believe. But one of the things that I felt that I needed to do was convene a lot of the council presidents and a lot of the council people from all over Ohio. So I hosted, drum roll, a nice reception, a nice party, great food, great atmosphere. And we invited all of these other council people, and we gelled. I mean, the Columbus council president, Shannon Harden, and myself have become very good friends. Cincinnati's council persons were there. Youngstown, my hometown's council people were there. Lakewood, all around the region. And we decided that we're going to really build a partnership in order to really try to address these kind of issues on a statewide level. A lot of times the way that, and I'm so glad that the courts continue to challenge these maps that are being done at the state level, because a lot of times, the state is not friendly to cities, and the 8 major cities that we have in Ohio sometimes get short shrift. They've taken away a lot of the income tax. They're pushing a lot of the burden back on cities when it comes to, like I mentioned about the police and fire pension fund with House Bill 512 and other things. And the city doesn't always have a good partner in the state. I will tell you that the state in this case, we have started to also lobby the state jointly on some other things, like around lead. Toledo and Cleveland were partners in really advocating around getting an allocation of money for lead to our cities. We've been very successful in lobbying Governor DeWine on some other things. Right now, a big issue that we're trying to jointly lobby for is the movie tax credit, so that we can have more flexibility. We just lost a major movie that's coming to the city because they couldn't, even though there's money in the tax credit, the law is not flexible enough in order to give the incentive that was needed for this television series that would have been a great television series in the city of Cleveland. And we need to boost that up to 140 million as opposed to the 40 million that it is now. So these are things that we need to jointly lobby for as cities. Tax structures to make sure that the state does not continue to take money and then not send it back to us. We send a disproportionate amount of money due to an old 1921 law down to the state that was supposed to be dispersed back to us. And the former governor, Kasich, made the decision to keep that money in the state to balance the state's budget, but the cities are left to fend for themselves. So that reception went a long way when we were in D.C. last week, just to build partnerships and just to really share ideas on how we can work together to lobby the state, and really just to share how we can just be partners and share best practices.
Thank you for that answer. Well, here's a question. Have actions by the state government harmed our public schools?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's been egregious what the state has done around education. And what I will tell you is that the state has, I actually went to the Supreme Court as a parent with the Roth case down in the Supreme Court, which was the voucher case. And the state has expanded and really dismantled the schools, the public school process and the access for students to come to public schools. And it's just been egregious. I can't begin to tell you how much of a disservice the state has done to our education systems. And in the name of choice and in the name of we're trying to provide better opportunities, what they have done is that they've dismantled a system and dismantled a structure that is probably one of the most essential structures of the cornerstones of our society, which is education. And I don't know how to get away with it. They have never followed the law. They basically have been not compliant with the Supreme Court's rules to say that you should not, to say that you should not, that property taxes should not be the sole way to support a school system. You'll never have an equitable school system if that's the case, because if I live in Orange, the amount of money that I can pay towards a school system is totally different than what we can in Cleveland or East Cleveland and some of these other areas. So I think the state has been totally deficient in its responsibility in education.
We have time for a couple more questions. How can council work to facilitate cross-sector solutions that address the intersecting social and economic challenges facing Cleveland?
Collaborative leadership. Collaborative leadership is one of the most important things that we have to do as a council. And we have to bring people in the room, as I said earlier, that are from the boardrooms and the streets, people from all sectors, cross sectors, and in order to solve our solutions. I think Cleveland for too long has worked in silos. And one of the things that we've done, which I'm proud to say, has been one of the first times that we've done this in a while, and it may seem like a small thing, but it was huge, and people are actually talking about it, is for the state capital budget, there were approximately 9 projects that we sent a joint letter from the mayor, myself as a council president, County Executive Armin Budish, the Greater Cleveland Partnership, the Cleveland Neighborhood Partnership, Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, sent a joint letter basically saying, hey, we as a region, these are the projects that we want. And 7 out of those 9 projects were in Cleveland. So the fact that we showed that cross-sector partnership between the public, private, philanthropic is important. Back in the 1990s, Harvard did a study, and there was a report that was done that talked about Cleveland being the epicenter of cross-sector collaboration. And somehow we've lost that along the way, and that's what we have to bring back in order to be a successful city. So using the bully pulpit to bring different people from different sectors into the room in order to solve some of the most complex and vexing issues. I have a great partnership with University Hospitals and Cleveland Clinic and Case Western Reserve and the Cleveland Institute of Art, because those are institutions in my area, and we work on problems jointly. We don't always say, well, it's your issue, you handle this, you handle that. But no, how can we come together and deal with this jointly? That's why I was so proud when Cleveland Clinic and Tommy Mihalovich and them gave about $50 million to lead, because that shows where you can kind of come together and build cross-sector collaboration and partnership to deal with a serious issue.
Thank you. Here's a question. What are the resources being made available for the relocation for Woodhill residents? What can concerned community members do to assist? Sounds like
that's great.
Local
I love it. I love it. I love it. So I actually just had a conversation with the CEO of CMHA, Jeff Patterson. First of all, I don't want the people of CMHA and the Woodhill Estates to leave. One of the things that I was adamant about is that I wanted to have a one-time move, which means that as we build new structures, we don't displace people. We give them an option, because you can't just tell people you have to go here. But I wanted it to make it where they only had to move one time, and that they could move into these new apartment buildings and these new structures that we're doing. The reason that question was probably asked is because we got a $35 million grant from HUD to redo CMHA, which is going to yield, and the city put in about $15.5 million for infrastructure improvements, and banks and others are coming to the table, and this is going to yield probably about a $200 million investment to not just renovate and redo and tear down the oldest public housing complex, one of the oldest public housing complex in the city, but some of these folks don't even have showers in where they live, and I take it personal because I actually live less than a half a mile from there, and I know these kids. They play ball in my yard. They go to school with my kids, and now we have an opportunity to rebuild that entire infrastructure. So the first thing I want to say is I don't want them to go. I want them to be here. I want to make sure whatever relocation money that we're talking about is to either relocate them into a home that they can buy in the neighborhood that's renovated, that's safe and healthy, or in one of these other townhomes that are going to be built. So I've been working closely with Mr. Patterson to make sure that we have a team of people, that we have about 6 people that are helping right now with that relocation process. And believe me, I'm going to be dogged on that, because I want every single one of those residents to live in that community.
Understood. There's a commitment there. How do you plan to involve residents of Cleveland in the decision-making process? Let me make that a little bit more specific, Council President. In other cities, there are budgetary processes that involve local residents taking control of a piece of the city budget. Do you ever see that being part of our efforts here in Cleveland?
I have mixed reviews on that, because you're talking about participatory budgeting.
Yeah.
I'm very democratic, but I'm also a person that understands that when I'm given a jacket to wear, I wear the jacket and I make the calls. I make the hard calls. It's hard to get 17 people in the room together to agree on how you spend money. I've experienced it, believe me, a couple of times the last 6 months or so. I always get input from the residents. I usually do a community meeting whenever we do the budget or when we have ARPA dollars and say, okay, let's hear your ideas. And I literally hear, what do you want? You know, people want more video cameras. They wanted more money for home repair. They wanted more money for infrastructure. They wanted to get these things done. I'm honest with people. I tell them what I can do and what I can't do, or what's eligible or what's not eligible. I spend an enormous amount of time really trying to educate the community and getting feedback from the community. I also have several venues, Facebook pages. I also have an email account that I just tell people, just give me your ideas and what we need, what ideas is that they need to have. So I get an enormous amount of public input whenever I make decisions. But I don't believe that we need to blow up the democracy and the structure that we have in place so that a group of people can come together and do participatory budget. And let me tell you why. Just like we put public comment in place for city council, and I'm all for public comment, and I think it was great for us to do it. I would tell you that I may have had one person from my community to go down to public comment. Most of the people that come from affluent communities or even outside of Cleveland to talk about issues that they're passionate about, which is great, but it doesn't represent all of Cleveland. It doesn't represent the mindset and thought process of all of Cleveland. Even if you look at the area that you serve, and you read all of those communities that I serve, I go from extreme poverty to extreme wealth and everything in between. And there's no way possible other than the democratic structure and process that we have in place to make sure that it process to distribute funding and to make decisions on budgeting that could be done in an equitable way, to just say ollie ollie in, free, everybody come. Well, then who's excluded? Yeah. Who's included? So I have some challenges with that. I've shared that with the folks, but I am always open whenever a group of people sit down and say, Blaine, here's what we'd like to see our money spent on, and beyond, have an honest discussion and dialogue about it. And I always do that, and I would encourage any other council person or anybody else to do that if that's the case, because the more involvement people got and the more ownership that people have, the more responsive they'll be and the more responsible that they will be in making sure that we're a successful city and a successful community.
Understood. I want to take one more question, but also give you time to think of some last words before we end this. It's been a
Absolutely.
Great session. So, one more question. Oh, this is a good one from a student, I think. What type of experiences should students seek out to prepare for a career in public service?
Go to the Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs. I'm serious. I mean,
Checks in the mail.
One of the biggest, I've always wanted to be, like I said, I really wish I would have taken up law, but a regret that I have because I was really busy working about 2 or 3 jobs. There's no excuses, but I was busy working 2 or 3 jobs and raising a family because I have 3 beautiful sons. My wife and I raised 3 beautiful sons. They're men now. One of the biggest regrets I have is not going and getting an education at Maxine Goodman Levin. And it dawned on me when I went through the leadership class here that, wow, you really learn great concepts and things like that. So if you're in this class and in this school, I'm joking, but I'm really serious. I mean, this is a good way and a breeding ground. A lot of the people that are successful in this city have come through these halls. And this is a good way to prepare for education. But also, stay in the ground. Stay grounded. Never forget where you come from. Always spend time in the neighborhood. Never allow yourself to get too educated and so fancy and and your academic prowess becomes so through the roof that you lose touch with the common person. I think it's Mark Twain that says that you have to be able to walk amongst kings and queens, but also amongst the paupers and peasants. And always stay on the ground. One of the things that I do is I try to spend much time as I can just walking the neighborhood and being on the ground and learning from people every day, because I could tell you what, I could learn just as much from Miss Rose and Miss Redwine and some of the people in the neighborhood that I can from some of the most educated doctors and lawyers and attorneys ever.
Indeed. Well, on behalf of my colleagues, thank you for that compliment. We really do appreciate it. What you just said seems to be a last word, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to really say a last word.
Well, I tell everybody that I want Cleveland to be first, I want Cleveland to be best, and I want Cleveland to be different. When I tell people that, they ask me, what do I mean? And here's what I mean, Dr. Dean. This is what I mean. I'm tired of Cleveland being last on every list. I'm tired of hearing the bad news and the misery index about Cleveland. I want to be first. I want us to do things, first. I want us to be from, in Talladega Nights, Billy Bob Thornton, when he says, if you're not first, you're last. I'm competitive. I'm an ex-athlete. Notice the X in front of that. And I want to be first. I want Cleveland to be exceptional. I want Cleveland to be different. We do have to do things different. We have to embrace change, but we also have to measure expectations, because change is not an event. It's a process, and we have to make sure that we make change, but it has to be incremental, and it has to be intentional, and it has to be for the right reasons and for what we want to accomplish. And it has to include a change in system to not just cater to the middle class and the wealthy, but also to make sure that we help take care of the poor. I also, at the end of the day, tell people that I want Cleveland to be the best. There's nothing wrong with trying to be the best. We got to change our psychology. So many people in the city of Cleveland and so many people in the region are so hard on ourselves and have what I call the soft bigotry of low expectations, or the whisper of self-sabotage, that we just aren't worthy of being the best. We are worthy of being the best. This is a great city. We have great assets. We have great people. We have great infrastructure. It's easy to navigate. The cost of living is good. We got to be our own cheerleaders, because sometimes we're going to have to pat ourselves on the back because everybody else is not going to come to our to our rescue. So that's why I love doing these kind of forums, because I get a chance really to tout Cleveland and tout what all of us can do and how we all can lock arms and have a collaborative leadership model to really catapult us to where we need to be. And I really believe that. That's not something that I say as rhetoric. It is really truly my ethos, pathos, and logos of life. And I really appreciate you, Dr. England, or I keep calling you Dr. England, Dean England, for giving me the opportunity to really share myself with your class and with your students and with your community.
Thank you, Council President Blaine Griffith. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, and please come back. You're
Anytime,
a dedicated public servant, and we appreciate it.
I'm always your guest. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.